I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do. What do you think the cause of the Civil War was?
Of course the Civil War was about slavery.
I think you had one side of the Civil War that was fighting for tradition, and I think you had another side of the Civil War that was fighting for change.
Hey everyone, it's David, producer for The Benjamin Dixon Show and Like It or Not. I wanted to give a little bit of attention to everything going on around Nikki Haley following her comments in response to a question about the Civil War. And I'm actually glad that we didn't put anything out until after a bit of time for her to respond and for other things to come out, because it's a little bit deeper, or a lot a bit deeper, than just her answer and the outcry around it. But if you missed it, yesterday, Wednesday, the 27th of December, Haley was in Berlin, New Hampshire, and was asked by someone at a town hall style event a question. Take a listen.
What was the cause of the United States Civil War?
Well, don't come with an easy question or anything. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do. What do you think the cause of the Civil War was?
I'm not ready to be president. I want to see your view on the cause of the Civil War.
I mean, I think it always comes down to the role of government.
2023, it's astonishing to me that you answer that question without mentioning the word slavery.
What do you want me to say about slavery?
No, you've answered my question. Thank you.
So that was what got the biggest outcry and biggest response, and everyone outraged and I would say feigning surprise, because this really shouldn't be surprising. I did think when I saw it, honestly, that the answer spoke to the time we're in, where even major political candidates for president that aren't Trump try to gaslight and beat around the bush to avoid mentioning slavery when discussing the Civil War. But there was further fallout and comment made on this afterwards. So earlier today, Haley spoke with New Hampshire radio host Jack Heath. She called into the radio show called The Pulse of NH, spoke with Heath, and this is what she had to say.
Well, two things on this, Jack. I mean, of course the Civil War was about slavery. We know that. That's the easy part of it. What I was saying was, what does it mean to us today? What it means to us today is about freedom. That's what that was all about. It was about individual freedom. It was about economic freedom. It was about individual rights. Our goal is to make sure, no, we never go back to the stain of slavery, but what's the lesson in all of that?
Okay, so doing a bit of cleanup, she also, John, said it was definitely a Democratic plant who asked this question. The voter was a Democratic plant. She says, that's why I later asked, what does it mean to you?
So I'm not sure if anyone, besides for those that have to be dishonest because they want to defend Haley, I don't think anyone would be surprised by this and would outright say this is cleanup. But she's also dragging out this coded language about it, where you make it more than just slavery, and it's about freedom, economics, individual freedom and rights. We'll get to that in a minute. But she also claimed that the person that was asking the question was a Democratic plant. It's possible. I might even say it's likely. It definitely wasn't someone that was friendly to her campaign, because that question wouldn't be asked by a supporter, I don't think. She's making the claim just to kind of push back and try to halt all of the attention to her answer. So, claiming it's a Democratic plant is sort of a way of saying what about and pointing the finger in hopes that people will then say, well, was it a plant? Who is it? Who's behind it? And then, attention goes elsewhere. But that wasn't the last that she had to say on it. So later this afternoon, still in New Hampshire, she addressed it again and tried to clarify, if you will. Take a look.
Last night I was asked about the Civil War and what I think of the Civil War, what was the cause of the Civil War. Of course the Civil War was about slavery. We know that. That's unquestioned, always the case. We know the Civil War was about slavery. But it was also more than that. It was about the freedoms of every individual. It was about the role of government. For 80 years, America had the decision and the moral question of whether slavery was a good thing and whether government, economically, culturally, any other reasons, had a role to play in that. By the grace of God, we did the right thing and slavery is no more. But the lessons of what that bigger issue with the Civil War are is that let's not forget what came out of that, which is government's role, individual liberties, freedom for every single person, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to do and be anything you want to be without anyone or government getting in your way. That should be the goal of what we always try and take away from that, right? Because we never want to return back to that place. But we always want to remember the lesson of what it means to be a free individual and that everyone deserves to be a free individual. So we stand by that. I say that as a Southerner. I say that as a Southern governor who removed the Confederate flag off the State House grounds. And I say that as a proud American of how far we have come.
Well, wasn't that a whole lot? And we're going to unpack it because there's a bunch of different angles here. First of all, I want to know whose side when she said that it was about slavery. And I want to know what was behind the sigh.
Of course the Civil War was about slavery. We know that.
I want to know if that was a relieved sigh, like thank God, or more like, oh God, why do we have to get into this? This is ridiculous. Or was it accidentally the CNN cameraman? I doubt it. But bigger than that, we're going to tackle the 2 or 3 other things she said here. Before we get to what came out of the Civil War, the fact that she's saying we made the right decision, yes, the United States eventually got to the right decision, but it was more like the Union got to the right decision, and the Confederation begrudgingly came back and patched things up. Let's not forget that we're having this whole conversation about the 14th Amendment and Trump's ability to run. The 14th Amendment came out of the Civil War and was intended to make sure that those that tried to secede and those that tried to take down the Union couldn't hold office in the United States post-Civil War. It didn't always work out. There's several cases of elected officials not being able to run, but then later on getting back into office. We won't go down history lane right now, but it's important to realize that. But the other thing is that South Carolina, the state that Haley was governor of, was a Confederate state, which she kind of gets to later on when she said that she took down the Confederate flag, but saying that we got there, even though, no, the South Carolina didn't really get there. It accepted defeat as one of the Confederate states, but I don't know that it really got to the point of realizing slavery was bad at the end of the Civil War. But the other thing she continues to make the point of is that it was about individual freedom and rights. I'd love for Haley to be asked about her views on the LGBTQ community and also have to address her views on abortion while speaking on the subject. Because she just said that, it's about freedom without government interference and freedom to practice your religion. Sure, practicing religion, but not religion entering government and controlling you, like in stopping women from having control of their own bodies. And while she's claiming it's about individual freedom, while the Emancipation Proclamation by Lincoln may have, in word, freed the slaves, it didn't do it right away, as our own Dr. Karl Mack has explained numerous times. It took several years for the slaves to be told. And even once they were told, many had to stay at the employment of their slave owners because they didn't have any other choice. They didn't have the capability to just go off on their own. Not only that, but the individual freedom and rights were not realized right away, even for those who were freed. They couldn't vote. They didn't have that right. They couldn't go to school. There's so many different things that in American society, by and large white society, people of color couldn't do. It took decades, even a century, for things to happen. And it didn't just come out of the Civil War. The Civil War may have been an initial step, but it was a very bumpy, slow grind, and still is when we look at minority communities like the LGBTQ community. So those individual rights are still not guaranteed to everybody, and it definitely wasn't guaranteed to slaves just because they were supposedly freed. But what I said earlier about the coded language is the economic part. It was about the economy, but it was about the slave economy. Because by getting rid of slavery, it significantly and drastically changed where economic power was in the country, because it took away so much wealth from the slaveholding South. It was economic, but it was about slavery and power. And the fact that they need to try so hard not to mention slavery and just use code words like economics and freedom in the sense of capitalistic freedom and business freedom, but not freedom for people of color, that speaks volumes that they have to beat around the bush and try so hard to use coded language to avoid saying something that's just very, very blatantly true about the Civil War. One last thing that she said here was at the end.
I say that as a Southern governor who removed the Confederate flag off the State House grounds.
Yeah, you did take the flag down, but it really wasn't willingly, and you didn't really want to do it. Before the flag was taken down, this was Nikki Haley.
What's your belief about the reason the Civil War was fought?
I mean, again, I think that as we look in government, as we watch government, you have different sides, and I think that you see passions on different sides, and I don't think anyone does anything out of hate. I think what they do is they do things out of tradition and out of beliefs of what they believe is right. I think you had one side of the Civil War that was fighting for tradition, and I think you had another side of the Civil War that was fighting for change. You know, at the end of the day, what I think we need to remember is that, you know, everyone is supposed to have their rights. Everyone's supposed to be free. Everyone's supposed to have the same freedoms as anyone else. So, you know, I think it was tradition versus change is the way I see it.
Tradition versus change on what?
On individual rights and liberty of people.
So that was back in 2010 when she spoke with the Palmetto Patriots, a Confederate heritage activist group, and was asked why the war was fought, why the Civil War was fought. She painted it as tradition versus change, so more coded language. We don't have the video, but later on in that interview, the Confederate flag came up in the discussion, and she said, quote, "It's not something I see as a priority right now. I think right now we need to be focusing on jobs and our economy and our education. You know, for those groups that come in and say they have issues with the Confederate flag, I will work to talk to them about it. I will work and talk to them about the heritage and how this is not something that is racist. This is something that is a tradition that people feel proud of, and let them know that we want their business in the state and that the flag where it is was a compromise of all people, that everybody should accept it by South Carolina." So the flag is not racist, it's tradition. Funny that she would say that and then later take it down, right? Well, it all came out of Dylan Roof's mass shooting at Mother Emanuel AME Church. Following that shooting, where 9 African Americans in a Bible study were killed, following that shooting, Bree Newsom climbed the flagpole outside the South Carolina State House and took down the Confederate flag that flew there. It was back up as soon as she was arrested, but just days later on July 9th, the legislature of South Carolina, which was dominated by the Republican Party there, passed a bill permanently removing the flag. And that's when Nikki Haley signed the bill and took down the flag. If it wasn't for Bree Newsom, the flag probably would still be up now. So the fact that Nikki Haley is trying to take credit for taking down the flag, despite her comments saying it's not a symbol of racism, it's just tradition, and that the Civil War was about the economy and individual rights. All of this coded language, walking on eggshells, beating around the bush, because you know that the people that you're asking to vote for you don't want to hear this blatant truth, the simple truth. We're in 2023, and we're still here. And then so many on the right wonder why we can't move on. And liberals as well, centrists, wonder why we can't just move on. Because we're still grappling with truths and trying to speak the truths and not let it be lied about. We don't want to teach this history in schools. We want to forget all about it. That's not how this works. I'll just end on this. There's a new special out by Trevor Noah. It's on Netflix, and he spoke about how America doesn't like change and hates talking about its history, and compared how Germany has handled its history since World War II, since Hitler, since the Holocaust, and how they have not hidden from it. They have taught what Germany did to their kids. They've also paid reparations, but most importantly, they've taught their children what the country did without trying to make them feel guilty, telling children that it's not their fault, but it is their responsibility to make sure that it doesn't ever happen again. And I'm sure that's a very simplistic view of how they communicate it, but the fact that they do it and they don't hide from history and it's in their history books. People don't like to hear that the U.S. could learn from Europe, but the U.S. could take a lot of lessons from other countries rather than continuing to try to run from the truth that's under the founding of the country and under the history of the country. Anyway, as always, let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we'll be back.